The great hall of Epsilon Prime Station stretched far beyond what human eyes could easily see. Thousands of beings from 17 different species filled the chamber, their forms ranging from the cloud-like Voltari to the massive stone-skinned Grenchar. At the center podium, Ambassador Daeho Kim stood alone, a small figure in simple gray diplomatic robes. Daeho's hands rested calmly on the speaking platform. His face showed no emotion as he looked across the assembled council members. Behind him, the holographic display showed the seal of humanity, a blue planet embraced by two hands. In a few minutes, that seal would be removed from council records forever. Honored council members, Daeho began, his voice clear and steady. I stand before you today to deliver humanity's final message to this assembly. After 400 years of membership, humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. This decision is final and immediate. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Some species clicked their mandibles in surprise. Others shifted their massive bodies. The Voltari flickered with what might have been confusion, but mostly the council seemed unconcerned. Councillor Thelvian of the Aetheron species rose from his crystalline seat. His body glowed with soft blue light as he spoke. Ambassador Kim, surely this is an emotional response to some minor diplomatic matter. Humans have always been somewhat dramatic. Perhaps you need time to reconsider? Daeho shook his head once. No reconsideration is needed, Counselor. Humanity has made its choice. All human personnel will evacuate council space within 30 days. All human-built facilities will be transferred or shut down according to proper protocols. We will honor all existing agreements until their natural expiration. High Speaker Mortax of the Grenchar Dominion laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. Let them go, Thelvian. Humans were always just adequate workers at best. They fixed things and filed reports. We have other species who can do the same. Administrator Kixta, speaking through a translation device since Voltari communicated through color and energy patterns, added her thoughts. Indeed, humanity never truly belonged among true spacefaring civilizations anyway. They were late to the stars and never achieved the greatness of elder species. Only one voice spoke differently. Observer Krelvis of the Thenari stood slowly. His gray-skinned form was thin and tall, his large eyes thoughtful. Council members, I urge caution. Humanity's contributions to our civilization may be greater than we acknowledge. Perhaps we should discuss what their departure truly means. Mortax waved a massive hand dismissively. You worry too much, Observer. The Council existed for 10,000 years before humans arrived. We will continue just fine without them. Daeho listened to it all without expression. When the Council fell silent, he spoke his final words as humanity's representative. Humanity thanks the Galactic Council for 4 centuries of membership. We wish you well in all your future endeavors. This transmission ends our official relationship. He bowed once, formally and precisely, then turned and walked from the chamber. No one tried to stop him. No one called him back. The Council had already begun discussing other matters before he reached the door. Across Council space, humanity moved with quiet efficiency. Captain Hyunwoo Park stood on the bridge of the transport ship Steady Resolve, watching as the last families boarded from Sigma-7 mining colony. The colony had been home to 15,000 humans for 3 generations. They were leaving behind homes, gardens, and memories. All personnel accounted for, Captain, reported his first officer. The colony is empty. Hyunwoo nodded. Seal the facilities. Leave everything clean and functional. We're not vandals. Sir, the mineral processors alone are worth billions. We built those. Shouldn't we? We take nothing that might be claimed as council property, Hyunwoo interrupted firmly. We leave with dignity. Set course for the border. In the medical stations orbiting Aetheron Prime, Dr. Yoonji Choi supervised the careful packing of human medical equipment. Aetheron doctors watched in confusion as centuries of accumulated research and technology was loaded onto transport ships. Dr. Choi, one Aetheron physician said, his crystalline face showing distress, the treatment protocols you developed for Crimson Plague, surely you'll leave copies. That disease could return. Yoonji looked at him sadly. I offered to train your people in those protocols 5 times over the last 10 years. Each time I was told it was unnecessary because humans would always be here to handle it. I cannot force knowledge on those who don't want to learn. She sealed the last container and walked away. Behind her, the Aetheron doctor stared at the empty laboratory where human researchers had worked for 2 centuries. Engineer Minho Kwan sat in the control room of Relay Station 47, one of hundreds of stations that formed the communication network spanning Council space. His fingers moved across the controls, systematically shutting down the human-built systems. Minho, his assistant said quietly. These stations took us 80 years to build. The Council can't maintain them. Half will fail within a year. Minho's jaw tightened, but his hands didn't stop moving. We offered maintenance training. We offered to teach their engineers. We were told we were being overprotective. Well, now they'll learn the hard way. The screens went dark one by one. Minho stood, took one last look at the station that had been his home for 15 years, and left without looking back. The evacuations continued like this across hundreds of worlds. Quietly, professionally, completely. Humans didn't rage or threaten. They didn't sabotage or steal. They simply packed their belongings, transferred their duties, and left. Teachers departed from schools where they'd educated the children of a dozen species. Engineers abandoned projects they'd spent decades building. Diplomats walked away from peace negotiations they'd spent years arranging. Merchants closed businesses that had served alien communities for generations. And everywhere the pattern was the same. Humans offered to transfer knowledge, to train replacements, to ensure continuity. And everywhere they were dismissed or ignored. The Council species seemed to believe that humans were easily replaced, that the work they did was simple enough for anyone to manage. On day 29, the last human vessels gathered at the border of Council space. Thousands of ships, from massive colony transports to small personal craft, formed a fleet that stretched across a solar system. They waited in perfect formation for the final signal. Ambassador Dae-ho Kim sent one last transmission from his ship at the fleet's head. His message was brief and professional, recorded and broadcast on all Council frequencies. This is Ambassador Dae-ho Kim, representing humanity's final communication to the Galactic Council. On behalf of all humans who have served in Council space, I offer our sincere thanks for the opportunity to have worked alongside you. We have learned much from our time among the stars with you. We hope that our contributions, however modest, have been of some value. Humanity wishes the Galactic Council prosperity and peace. We hope you find the future bright. This is our final transmission. Farewell. The message ended. No threats, no accusations, no demands, just a simple goodbye. Then, as the 30th day arrived, the human fleet moved as one. Engines ignited across thousands of ships, and humanity crossed the border of Council space. As the last vessel passed the boundary, all communication ceased. Every emergency frequency went silent. Every data connection closed. Every contact point disappeared. Humanity had left quietly as they'd promised. Behind them, the Council celebrated briefly and then forgot about them entirely. It would be months before anyone noticed what they'd lost, and by then it would be far too late. 6 months passed quickly for the Galactic Council. Life continued as it always had, or so they believed. The Voltari Collective traded their energy crystals across 17 sectors. The Aetheron conducted their scientific research in gleaming laboratories. The Grenchar patrolled the borders with their mighty warships. Everything seemed normal. Then the problems began. Trade Administrator Vexna of the Voltari Collective stared at her screens in growing frustration. The shipping routes that had run smoothly for decades were suddenly problematic. Cargo ships were taking longer to reach their destinations. Some were getting lost entirely, wandering off course and burning fuel searching for the right paths. "This makes no sense," she said to her assistant. "These are established routes. Ships have followed them for 100 years. Her assistant flickered nervously, colors shifting through the Voltari communication spectrum. "Administrator, I've been reviewing the records. Most of these routes were suggested by Merchant Captain Somin Han." Vexna paused. "The human?" "Yes, Administrator. She maintained a database of optimal shipping routes. She updated it constantly based on solar activity, gravitational shifts, and traffic patterns. She shared it freely with all Voltari merchants. I think we forgot how to calculate routes ourselves." Vexna felt something like shame. Though Voltari didn't experience emotions the same way other species did, they had become dependent on human help without even noticing. "Can we recreate her work?" "We're trying, Administrator. But it's complex. Very complex." 6 months later, they had a new routing system. It cost billions to develop and worked at only 60% efficiency, compared to what Soman had provided for free. Ships still got lost. Trade still suffered. And the Voltari economy began its slow decline. Meanwhile, on Aetheron Prime, hospitals were facing a crisis. A new illness had appeared, something the Aetheron had never seen before. It spread quickly through their population, causing crystal formations to crack and energy flows to destabilize. Head physician Kensha worked desperately to find a cure. She had access to all the equipment, all the data, and all the traditional Aetheron medical knowledge, but nothing worked. The illness continued to spread and people continued to die. "I don't understand," she told her staff in frustration. "We have the research. We have the tools. Why can't we solve this?" An older physician, one who had worked alongside humans for many years, spoke quietly. "Because head physician Jiwan Li isn't here. One human doctor? We have thousands of Aetheron physicians." "Yes," the old doctor agreed, "but Jiwan taught us how to think differently. She showed us how to combine intuition with analysis, how to look beyond obvious symptoms, how to ask questions we hadn't considered. We learned procedures from her, but we didn't learn how to think like she did." Kensha wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Looking back at the medical records, she saw the truth. For 17 years, humans had been solving problems that Aetheron doctors couldn't. Not because humans were smarter, but because they approached problems differently. They were creative in ways that Aetheron, for all their brilliance, were not. The illness was eventually contained, but it took 3 times longer than it should have. Thousands died who might have been saved, and in every hospital, doctors quietly wondered how many more would die in future emergencies, without human colleagues to help them see solutions they couldn't find alone. The Grenchar Dominion prided itself on military strength. Their warriors were legendary throughout the galaxy, their warships feared by all potential enemies. But General Voxtar was starting to notice problems. Border raiders had appeared in the outer territories, small ships testing Grenchar defenses. They should have been easy to defeat. The Grenchar had superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior warriors. Yet somehow the raiders kept slipping through. How is this possible? Voxtar demanded at a strategy meeting. "We have sensors covering every approach. We have patrol routes that should intercept any intrusion. We have defense platforms at every weak point." His tactical officer hesitated before speaking. "General, those sensor placements were designed by..." General Hanel Nam. "The patrol routes were optimized by Commander Yuna Song. The threat assessments that told us where to put our platforms were created by analyst Tai Hyung Shin. They were humans," Voxtar said slowly, understanding dawning. "Yes, General, and they're gone. We have the systems they built, but we don't understand the thinking behind them. When something unexpected happens, we don't know how to adapt." Voxtar reviewed the records himself over the following weeks. What he found disturbed him deeply. For decades, humans had been running the Grenchar military's logistics, strategy, and intelligence operations. The Grenchar had thought of humans as advisors, as support staff. But the humans had been doing all the actual thinking. The Grenchar were magnificent warriors in direct combat. But warfare was more than fighting. It was planning, coordinating, adapting, and predicting, and the humans had been handling all of that while the Grenchar took the credit for victories. When the raiders attacked again, the Grenchar response was slow and uncoordinated. Ships arrived too late. Intelligence reports were incomplete. Strategies that should have been obvious weren't considered. The Grenchar won through sheer firepower, but it was messy and costly. "We've become a hammer," Voxtar told his officers bitterly. "Strong but clumsy. The humans were our precision, our planning, our mind, and we never even thanked them." Observer Krelvis of the Thinari had been watching everything carefully. The Thinari were neutral observers within the council, tasked with maintaining records and providing unbiased analysis. Krelvis had always liked humans, had respected their work, and had tried to warn the council about their departure. Now he began a comprehensive investigation. He reviewed centuries of records, interviewed thousands of individuals, and compiled data from every corner of council space. What he discovered shocked him, even though he'd suspected the truth. Humans had operated 34% of all council infrastructure maintenance. Every third critical system had human engineers keeping it running. And those humans hadn't just followed instructions. They'd improved systems, trained others, and created redundancies to prevent failures. Human mediators had resolved 67% of interspecies disputes in the last century. Humans had a gift for understanding different perspectives, for finding common ground, for convincing hostile parties to work together. Without them, old rivalries and conflicts were resurging. Human engineers had designed or improved 89% of current Council technology. That didn't mean other species weren't brilliant, they were. But humans had a talent for taking brilliant ideas and making them practical, reliable, and accessible to everyone. Human teachers had trained specialists in every Council species. Entire generations of doctors, engineers, pilots, and administrators had learned their skills from human instructors who had patience and skill that other species often lacked. Human artists, writers, and cultural ambassadors had created the social bonds holding the Council together. They'd translated not just languages, but ideas, helping species understand each other in ways that went beyond mere words. Krelvas compiled his findings into a report and presented it to the Council. He stood before the same chamber where Daeho Kim had delivered humanity's farewell 6 months earlier. "Council members," Krelvas said, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "I have completed my analysis of human contributions to our civilization. The findings are significant." He displayed his data, showing charts and statistics that painted a clear picture. The Council had depended on humanity far more than anyone had realized. The current problems, trade disruptions, medical crises, military vulnerabilities, were all directly linked to humanity's absence. "The evidence is clear," Krelvas concluded. Humanity was not simply another member species. They were the glue holding our civilization together. Without them, we are beginning to fail. High Speaker Mortax listened to it all, then shook his massive head. "Observer Krelvas, you overstate the case. Yes, humans did some useful work, but they were replaceable. Every function they performed can be handled by other species. We simply need time to adjust," Councillor Thelvian agreed. "The Council existed for thousands of years before humanity arrived. We were great then. We will be great again." Krelvas looked around the chamber, seeing dismissal on every face. They didn't want to hear the truth. They couldn't accept that they'd been wrong about humanity. "Council members," he said quietly, "I must point out one more fact. Yes, the Council existed before humanity, but that Council was declining. Growth had stalled. Innovation had slowed. Species were becoming isolated from each other. The Council was slowly dying." He paused, letting that sink in. "Then humanity arrived. And suddenly everything changed. We grew, we innovated, we came together as never before. Humanity didn't just contribute to the Council. They saved it, and now they're gone." The chamber fell silent. For a moment, Krelvas thought he'd reached them. Then Mortax spoke again. "That is your opinion, observer. The Council disagrees. We will manage perfectly well without humanity. This session is adjourned." Krelvas left the chamber knowing he'd failed. The Council wouldn't accept the truth, not yet. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was beginning to understand the meaning of collapse. It started with small failures that seemed unrelated. A life support system failed on a mining station, leaving workers in darkness for 6 hours before emergency repairs could be made. A trade convoy got lost in space and wandered for 3 weeks before finding its destination. A diplomatic summit ended in violence over a simple misunderstanding that could have been easily prevented. But these small failures multiplied and cascaded into larger problems. Systems that humans had maintained began breaking down in ways that no one understood. Knowledge that humans had carefully preserved became inaccessible. Skills that humans had taught were forgotten or misapplied. The Council's central database was one of the first major casualties. Archivist Seonho Bae had maintained it for 30 years. He'd created complex systems for organizing information, cross-referencing data, and preserving knowledge. More importantly, he'd been the person everyone contacted when they couldn't find what they needed. The database still existed after Seonho left. All the information was still there. But finding anything became nearly impossible. The search function stopped working properly. Data became corrupted. Backups turned out to be incomplete because no one had maintained the maintenance systems themselves. "I don't understand," a Voltari technician complained to his supervisor. "The backup systems are failing, but there should be backups for the backup systems." "There were," the supervisor said tiredly. "Seonho maintained them. Did you think they just ran themselves?" Similar problems appeared everywhere. Engineer Jaemin Yoon had written detailed documentation for every system he'd worked on. The documentation still existed, but it had been written for people who understood basic problem-solving principles. When something broke in an unexpected way, the instructions were useless. The manual says to replace Component 7 if the system overheats, a frustrated engineer reported. But Component 7 is fine. Something else is wrong, but the manual doesn't say what to do. Then figure it out, his supervisor snapped.
Use your brain. I don't know how, the engineer admitted miserably.
Yamin always handled the complex problems. I just followed his instructions. Observer Krelvis watched the decline with growing concern. He'd been proven right, but there was no satisfaction in it. The council was failing and innocent people were suffering. He decided to take an unauthorized action. Using a small personal ship, Krelvis traveled to the border of human space. He broadcast messages on all frequencies requesting contact, asking for dialogue, begging for help. The border was empty. Human space was completely silent. It was as if humanity had built an invisible wall and stepped behind it. Nothing came in or went out. No ships, no messages, no signals of any kind. But then Krelvis noticed something. A small buoy, clearly human-made, floating at the border. It didn't respond to his hails. It didn't move or react. It simply watched. Krelvis understood. Humanity hadn't vanished. They were still there, just behind the border. They were watching the council's space. They knew what was happening. They simply chose not to respond. He returned to council space with a heavy heart. Humanity wasn't coming back. They'd made their choice and were content with it. Meanwhile, the Voltari Collective's economy had entered full recession. The problems went beyond shipping routes. Without human traders acting as neutral intermediaries, old species rivalries had resurfaced. The Etheron and Grenshar were engaged in a bitter trade war, and the Voltari were caught in the middle. Trade Counselor Vexna discovered something while reviewing historical records. For decades, human merchants had been taking financial losses to keep certain trade routes viable. They'd done this quietly, never seeking recognition or compensation. They'd simply understood that the Council's economic stability required sacrifice, and they'd made it willingly. Now those routes were collapsing. Colonies that depended on them were suffering. People were going hungry. Industries were shutting down, and there was nothing the Voltari could do to stop it. Why didn't they tell us? Vexna asked her assistant. Why didn't they explain what they were doing? They tried, Counselor. I found 17 reports over the last 50 years where human merchants explained the economic vulnerabilities. Each report was filed and ignored. Vexna reviewed those reports herself. They were clear, detailed, and completely correct. Humans had warned them exactly what would happen if the trade networks failed. The Council had simply never bothered to read the warnings. The military situation was even worse. A major pirate fleet emerged in the Outer Rim, raiders from beyond Council space who had clearly been watching and learning. They struck 17 systems simultaneously in a coordinated attack. The Council's defense forces responded chaotically. Without human strategic coordination, there was no unified command. Ships arrived too late or in the wrong places. Intelligence was incomplete or contradictory. 3 colonies fell before the Council could organize an effective defense. General Voxtar reviewed the battle records and felt something like shame. Every mistake the Grenshar had made, every vulnerability the pirates had exploited had been predicted in human military reports. General Hanul Nam had written a detailed analysis 15 years ago about exactly this type of coordinated attack and how to defend against it. The report had been dismissed as overcautious human thinking. Now Voxtar read it again and realized that every suggestion, every precaution, every defensive measure the humans had recommended would have prevented the disaster. The humans had been trying to protect the Council, and the Council had ignored them. The pirates were eventually driven off, but the damage was done. The Council had suffered its first major military defeat in 3 centuries, and everyone knew it was because the humans weren't there to plan the defense. High Speaker Mortax called an emergency council session. The agenda was carefully worded: assessment of post-human infrastructure challenges. No one wanted to admit openly that they missed humanity, but the problems could no longer be ignored. The debate was intense. Some species still insisted that humanity's contributions had been minimal. They argued that the current problems were temporary, that given time everything would return to normal. Others were beginning to panic. They presented statistics showing declining trade, increasing conflicts, failing systems, and growing unrest. The council was fracturing, they argued, and would collapse completely if something didn't change. Observer Krelva spoke for a third position. Council members, we face a choice. We can continue pretending that we don't need humanity and watch our civilization fall apart, or we can admit the truth and ask them to return. Never, Mortax said immediately. The council will not beg. Then the council will fall, Krelvas replied simply. The debate continued for hours. Finally, a vote was called. The motion was to officially invite humanity to return to the council, offering whatever incentives were necessary. The motion failed. The council's pride wouldn't permit them to admit they needed humanity. Instead, they voted to allocate massive resources to replacement initiatives. They would hire consultants, train specialists, and rebuild systems without human help. It was too little, too late, and everyone in the chamber knew it. But admitting they'd been wrong about humanity was harder than watching their civilization decline. After the session, Krelva stood alone in the empty chamber. He looked at the spot where Ambassador Daeho Kim had delivered humanity's farewell a year ago. The human had known this would happen. They'd all known. That's why they left. Humans had understood what the council refused to accept. You cannot build a civilization on the unacknowledged labor of others. You cannot take and take and take while giving nothing back. Eventually, those who serve will stop serving, and then you discover how much you truly depended on them. Krelvas made a decision. If the council wouldn't officially seek humanity's help, he would do so personally. It might cost him his position, might even get him exiled. But he had to try. The council was failing. Species were suffering. People were dying. And somewhere beyond the border, humanity watched and waited, judging whether the council had learned anything from their departure. Krelvas hoped they had. But looking around at the empty chamber, at the failing systems, at the pride and stubbornness that prevented the council from admitting their mistakes, he wasn't sure they had learned anything at all. The question was whether they would learn before it was too late. And Krelvas feared that time was running out very quickly. 18 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was in crisis. The Voltari collective threatened to leave if economic conditions didn't improve. The Aetheron were hoarding medical supplies and refusing to share with other species. The Grenshar were becoming aggressive, blaming everyone else for their military failures. The council that had existed for thousands of years was tearing itself apart. Every attempt to replace human contributions had failed spectacularly. Chief Engineer Plixton of the Voltari had spent 8 months trying to recreate the improvements Dr. Jihuno had made to faster-than-light communication systems. The result was a disaster. The new system was less efficient, cost 3 times more to run, and broke down constantly. I don't understand, Plixton told his team in frustration. I have all of Dr. O's notes. I followed his procedures exactly. Why doesn't it work? A junior engineer, one of the few who had worked directly with Dr. O, spoke hesitantly. Engineer Plixton, Dr. O's notes explain what he did. They don't explain how he thought. He didn't just follow procedures. He understood the underlying principles in ways we don't. That's ridiculous, Plixton snapped. Technology is technology. If you follow the right steps, you get the right result. That's not how humans approached problems, sir. They thought differently than we do. Plixton wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The evidence was clear. Having the instructions wasn't enough. You had to understand the thinking behind them. Diplomatic failures were even more devastating. A border dispute between 2 minor species, the kind of problem that human mediators had routinely resolved in weeks, had escalated into a shooting war. Diplomatic Corps Commander Thalrex had tried to mediate using standard council protocols. But standard protocols didn't work without the human touch. Humans had possessed an unusual ability to understand how different species thought, to find common ground, to make hostile parties see each other as people rather than enemies. Without that ability, diplomacy became just formalities and procedures, and formalities and procedures couldn't stop people from killing each other. By the time the war ended, millions were dead, and the Council's reputation as peacekeepers was destroyed. In medical facilities across Council space, researchers struggled with problems that had once been routine. Dr. Kensha on Etheron Prime had access to all the data Dr. Minji Kang had left behind. She had the equipment, the samples, the research notes. Everything except the most important thing, the way Dr. Kang had thought about problems. It's not about the facts, an older physician explained to Kensha. Minji didn't just know more than us. She thought differently. She combined scientific rigor with intuition and empathy. She could look at a patient and see patterns we missed. She asked questions we didn't think to ask. Kensha finally understood. Humans weren't just good at specific tasks. They had a different way of approaching problems entirely. They were creative in ways other species weren't. They could adapt and improvise where other species got stuck following established procedures. Observer Krelvis had been conducting his own research, going deeper than his earlier reports. He'd interviewed hundreds of individuals who had worked with humans. He'd reviewed thousands of case files, and he'd made a crucial discovery. Humans were generalists. Every other council species specialized. The Voltari were brilliant traders but terrible warriors. The Grenshar were mighty fighters but poor diplomats. The Etheron were gifted scientists but struggled with practical applications. Each species had specific strengths and specific weaknesses. But humans could do everything. They weren't the best fighters, but they could fight. They weren't the best traders, but they could trade. They weren't the best scientists, but they could do science. They were competent at everything, and they could bridge the gaps between specialists. More importantly, humans were adaptable. When they encountered a problem, they didn't just solve it. They learned from it, adapted their thinking, taught others, and made sure it never happened again. They grew and changed in ways other species simply didn't. The Council had treated humanity as just another member species, one more civilization among many. But humans had been the glue holding everything together. They'd been the translators, the mediators, the teachers, the problem solvers. They'd been the flexibility in a rigid system, the creativity in a bureaucratic structure, and now they were gone. Krelvis decided it was time for desperate action. He assembled a small team of volunteers, people who had worked closely with humans and understood what had been lost. Lieutenant Kixra of the Grenshar, a young warrior who had trained under human instructors. Healer Vensha of the Etheron, who had worked alongside human doctors for decades. Merchant Tixna of the Voltari, whose family business had been saved by human traders. This is an unauthorized mission, Krelvis told them. The Council has not approved it. If we're caught, we'll face severe punishment, but I believe it's necessary. Where are we going? Kixra asked. To find humanity, Krelvis said simply. They crossed the border in a small science vessel, broadcasting messages on all frequencies. They requested dialogue, offered apologies, begged for a chance to speak, and this time they got a response. 6 human warships appeared around them. The designs were unfamiliar, clearly advanced beyond anything humanity had possessed when they were part of the Council. The technology had obviously progressed rapidly in their isolation. A voice came over the communication channel, professional, and neither warm nor cold. Observer Krelvis, you are in violation of human space. State your business. Captain, Krelvis responded, I am Observer Krelvis of the Thinari. With me are Lieutenant Kixra, Healer Vensha, and Merchant Tixna. We request permission to speak with human authorities about the Galactic Council's current situation. There was a pause. Then the voice responded, You may dock with our border station. Come alone, Observer. Your companions will remain on your ship under guard. The meeting took place in a simple room on an abandoned station at the border. Captain Boyoung-an of the HMSV Quiet Resolve waited for him there. She was middle-aged, with gray in her hair and calm, steady eyes that had seen much. Krelvis explained the Council's situation. The failing systems, the economic collapse, the military vulnerabilities, the diplomatic failures. He explained how every problem stemmed from humanity's absence. He begged for their help. Captain An listened without interrupting. When Krelvis finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question. Observer Krelvis, when humanity was part of the Council, how many times did we formally request recognition of our contributions? Krelvis had prepared for this. He'd reviewed the records thoroughly. 17 times over 4 centuries, Captain. And how many times were we acknowledged? Once. 237 years ago, the Council officially recognized human medical teams for their work during the Crimson Plague outbreak. And what did they call us in that recognition? Krelvis closed his eyes. He knew this part would be difficult. Adequate support personnel. Captain Ahn nodded. When our engineers rebuilt the Voltari trade network after the Cascade collapse, saving billions of lives and trillions in commerce, what was our reward? You were not mentioned in the official accounts. When we warned the Council about military vulnerabilities that are now being exploited by raiders, what did General Mortax say? He said humans were too cautious to understand true warfare. Captain Ahn stood and walked to the window looking out at the stars. We didn't leave because we were angry, Observer. We left because we finally understood the truth. The Council didn't value us. They used us, and they didn't even realize they were doing it. She turned back to face him. Humanity is thriving now, Observer. Without the Council, we've advanced our technology dramatically. We've established new colonies, made incredible discoveries, developed new arts and culture. We're free to be ourselves instead of being the Council's maintenance workers. So when you ask if we'll return to help the Council, you're really asking if we'll return to being taken for granted, if we'll return to being invisible, if we'll return to a place where our greatest achievements are credited to others and our warnings are ignored until disaster strikes. She met Krelvis's eyes directly. The answer is no. Krelvis felt his hope dying. But then Captain Ahn added something more. However, you personally, Observer Krelvis, have always treated humans with respect. You saw us when others didn't. You warned the Council about our departure. You're here now seeking help not for yourself, but for those who are suffering. She handed him a small data chip. This contains solutions to the 7 most critical problems facing the Council right now: medical protocols, engineering specifications, diplomatic frameworks, strategic analyses. It's not enough to save the Council. That's their responsibility. But it's enough to save lives in the short term. Krelvis took the chip with shaking hands. Captain, I thank you. Don't thank me, Ahn said quietly. Give that information to those who need it. Tell them where it came from. And tell the Council this. Humanity left quietly because we're not interested in revenge. We left because we're done with being used. But we're not monsters. We won't let innocent people suffer for their leader's arrogance. She walked toward the door, then paused. 2 years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. The Grand Chamber on Epsilon Prime Station was no longer full. 3 species had left the Council during the crisis, unable to survive the economic and social collapse. Those who remained sat in a chamber that felt too large, too empty, too much like a monument to past glory that would never return. Observer Krelvis stood before them with his final report. The data chip Captain Boyong-Ahn had given him had saved millions of lives. The medical protocols had stopped several disease outbreaks. The engineering specifications had prevented major infrastructure failures. The diplomatic frameworks had resolved conflicts before they became wars. But everyone knew it was only temporary. The problems would return. New crises would emerge, and humanity wouldn't be there to solve them. Council members, Krelvis began, I have completed my comprehensive analysis of humanity's role in our civilization. I will now present the evidence that can no longer be ignored or dismissed. He displayed 4 centuries of data, organized with scientific precision. Every chart, every statistic, every case study pointed to the same undeniable conclusion. Humanity had been essential to the Council's functioning, and without them, the Council was dying. Every major achievement of the last 400 years had significant human involvement, Krelvis said. Humans resolved 89% of interspecies conflicts. Human-maintained systems were 300% more efficient than species-specific alternatives. The Council's period of greatest prosperity directly matches the period of humanity's greatest involvement. He paused, letting the data speak for itself. Then he showed something more personal. He displayed communications from humans over the years. Polite diplomatic messages pointing out inefficiencies, suggesting improvements, offering to train specialists, warning about potential problems. Humanity tried to help us, Krelvis said quietly. Again and again they warned us. They offered solutions. They attempted to build redundancy into critical systems, so we wouldn't be helpless without them. We ignored every warning. We dismissed every suggestion. We treated their attempts to ensure our survival as overreach or interference. The chamber was silent. Some council members looked ashamed. Others looked angry, but no one could dispute the evidence. Krelvis played his final piece of evidence, something he'd found in the abandoned human quarters. A personal recording from Ambassador Daeho Kim, never meant for council ears. In it, Daeho spoke with Dr. Sun-hee Park, humanity's chief science advisor 3 months before the Exodus. How much longer can we keep doing this, Sun-hee? Daeho's voice was tired. We give everything. Our best minds, our greatest innovations, our children's futures. And for what? To be called adequate? To watch our discoveries credited to others? To have our warnings ignored until disaster strikes, then be blamed for not warning loudly enough? Dr. Park's response was equally weary. The young ones are leaving, Daeho. Every year more of our brightest choose to emigrate rather than serve the council. They see no future here. Can we blame them? No, Daeho said. We can't. Perhaps it's time to admit the truth. We can't change the council. We can only choose whether to continue being diminished by it. The recording ended. The silence in the chamber was absolute. High Speaker Mortak stood slowly. He looked old now, worn down by 2 years of crisis and failure. Observer Krelvis is correct, he said, his voice heavy. We have failed. Not just humanity, but ourselves and the principles this council was founded upon. He looked around the chamber at the other council members. The question is not whether we need humanity, we do. The question is whether we are capable of becoming a council worthy of them. For the first time since humanity's departure, the council began to discuss the truth. They talked about how they'd treated humans, how they'd taken credit for human work, how they'd dismissed human contributions as insignificant. They talked about their pride, their prejudice, their blindness, and slowly, painfully, they began to discuss reform. Trade Councilor Vexna proposed new regulations to ensure all species received credit for their contributions. Healer Kensha suggested changing how the council acknowledged and compensated important work. General Voxtar advocated for transparent recognition of who actually performed strategic planning and analysis. Over 6 months, the council underwent changes that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. They restructured their recognition systems. They implemented new protocols to prevent exploitation. They established review processes to ensure every species' contributions were properly acknowledged. Finally, they drafted a message to humanity. Not demanding their return, not ordering them to help, but acknowledging what had been done to them and asking if dialogue was possible. The message was carefully worded, honest about the council's failures, clear about the reforms being implemented. It was an invitation to negotiate, not as a member species returning to its place, but as an independent civilization meeting with equals. Observer Krelvis was chosen to deliver the message. He crossed into human space again, this time with full council authorization. The Human Border Patrol recognized him and permitted his passage. Ambassador Daeho Kim met with him, no longer in active service but still influential in human diplomatic circles. They met in the same station where Krelvis had spoken with Captain An months earlier. We've seen the reforms, Daeho said after reviewing the council's message. They're impressive, genuine even. But Observer Krelvis, reforms on paper mean nothing. The real question is whether the council has truly changed. I cannot promise the council has changed completely, Krelvis admitted. Species are slow to learn. Prejudices run deep. But I can promise this, we finally see you. We understand what we lost, and we understand that we lost it because of our own failures. Daeho was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. Finally, he spoke. Then we can begin negotiations. Not for humanity to rejoin the council. That will never happen, but for something new, something better. The negotiations took 8 months. Human representatives and council diplomats worked together to create a framework for a new relationship. Not membership, not subordination, but partnership between equals. The Treaty of New Beginnings established several key points. Humanity would remain independent, but would establish diplomatic and trade relations with the Council. Technology and knowledge would be exchanged fairly, with proper credit and compensation. Joint research initiatives would be conducted as equal partnerships. Human advisors could be assigned to Council institutions, but only at the Council's request and with appropriate compensation. Most importantly, a cultural exchange program would ensure that future generations understood each other. Human children would learn about Council species. Council children would learn about humanity. They would grow up seeing each other as equals and partners, not as servants and masters. The treaty's greatest champions were the young. Lieutenant Kixra, the Grenshar warrior who had been part of Krelvas's expedition, now commanded a mixed human Grenshar squadron. She told her troops, "My human instructors taught me that strength without wisdom is just violence. The Council forgot that lesson. We won't." Healer Vensha, the Etheron physician, established a joint medical academy with human doctors. Above the entrance, she placed the words of her human mentor, Dr. Jiwan Li. "Medicine is not about species. It's about compassion." Merchant Tixina created a new trade network as equal partners with human merchants. Her company operated under a simple principle: fair exchange builds lasting prosperity. 5 years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council had stabilized. It was smaller now and humbler, but it was healthier. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a genuine respect for all member species and their contributions. Humanity thrived in its independence. Human space had expanded significantly. Human technology had advanced beyond what anyone had thought possible. Human culture flourished in ways it never could have under the Council's shadow. But humans and Council species now worked together as true partners. Human innovations were properly credited and celebrated. Council achievements were genuine, not dependent on uncredited human labor. When they collaborated, it was by choice with mutual respect and fair compensation. On the 5th anniversary of humanity's departure, a monument was unveiled in the Council's Grand Plaza. It stood where Ambassador Daeho Kim had delivered humanity's farewell 5 years earlier. The monument showed a human hand and a Thainari hand clasped together, carved from a single piece of stone. The inscription was written in every Council language. They left quietly, teaching us what we should have known. Respect cannot be demanded, only earned. Contribution without recognition is exploitation. Those who serve faithfully deserve to be seen. May we never forget again. Observer Krelva stood before the monument with Ambassador Daeho Kim. Both were older now, their faces marked by years of hard work and difficult truths. "Do you think it will last?" Daeho asked quietly. "The changes? The reforms? The understanding?" Krelvas considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. Species forget. New generations may repeat old mistakes. The Council might fall back into bad habits. Then why fight so hard for this?